Buying your first telescope can either make or break you as a new astronomer. Do you buy a cheap telescope and get frustrated by plastic lenses, shaky tripods, and terrible free accessories? Or do you buy a telescope that's way too advanced for your needs and go crazy because you don't understand how to run it? Take a deep breath and let's talk about your options as a new astronomer. Telescopes come in a bewildering array of sizes, brands, and colors. With all the marketing hype companies come up with to lure you into buying their products, it's easy to get something that you'll use a couple of times, then get rid of it because it frustrates you every time you set it up. It's pretty cliche to say, you get what you pay for, but it's especially true with telescopes. You should at least understand some of the reasons why it's true, so you can make informed choices when picking out your first real telescope. Telescopes can be broken into three general categories for the beginning astronomer: the refractor, the reflector, and the catadioptric telescope. By the end of this, you'll be able to pick one that meets your needs as an astronomer. Now let's talk about size for a minute, because size actually does matter in telescopes. But wait, you say, I thought it was all about magnification. No. Magnification is a tactic that unscrupulous telescope salesmen use to get you to buy what is often an inferior and frustrating telescope. But that's not to say magnification isn't important, just not when starting out. Because we're dealing with light, or the lack of light at night, the larger your lens or mirror is, the more light you can gather, which means the brighter your target will be. Magnification comes into the picture only after you can pull in enough light to get a decent view of what you're looking at. This quest for larger and larger telescope sizes eventually infects all astronomers with a terrible disease, one that we call aperture fever, where no telescope is big enough and the quest for larger and larger telescopes starts to become an obsession. Beginning telescopes can be found from dozens of manufacturers on any number of websites. I've seen them advertised on tool sites, home improvement stores, toy sites, big box stores, and even auto parts retailers of all places. This is a problem for you because your money can be spent on a cheap kit that includes useless accessories like a box full of cheap eyepieces, a misleading image enhancer like a Barlow that's so poor you can't even see through it. But if you order from a reputable dealer like Celestron or Meade or Orion Telescopes, it's pretty tough to go wrong unless you're browsing their very lowest end. Because that's what they do. They make and sell telescopes, not outdoor clothing or toys or USB-powered doodads for your phone, just telescopes and accessories to make that night under the stars more awesome. Even with that knowledge though, always read the reviews on what you're purchasing, as there's always someone who has valuable information on the model you have your eye on. Join a local astronomy club. Get online and sign up for Cloudy Nights or any number of great astronomy forums, and ask questions about potential purchases. You'll be surprised to find how eager we as astronomers are to get out and talk about our gear and about getting into the best hobby in the universe. Our first segment deals with the refracting telescope, or refractor, which is what most people think of when they hear telescope. It all started around 1608 with German-Dutch lensmaker Hans Lippershey's design of a simple telescope that had a whopping 3 times magnification. See, from the beginning, people were pushing magnification, magnification. Wait a minute, I can hear you say. I thought it was Galileo. Well, good guess, as he's often credited with the first scientific use of the telescope, but he did not in fact invent it. He was an amateur astronomer looking for a way to see what's up there, just like you. Galileo famously used a refractor, which in his day was the pinnacle of optical design, and which he used to make some of the most important discoveries of the scientific age. The refractor is the simplest type of telescope design, with a big lens called the objective up front and a smaller lens at the back called an eyepiece or ocular. Even though this type of telescope is the simplest, in many ways it's the most expensive to make correctly. High-quality refractors are tough to build because as light travels through the objective, the different colors that make up light move through the glass at different angles, causing the image that ends up hitting your eye to be at different spots. This produces what is called color fringing, or chromatic aberration, and it can make the image have halos or color around bright objects like stars. For many people, this is just an annoyance they can deal with, but if you ever decide to get into photographing those beautiful lights in the sky, it can be hard to ignore. To get rid of this unwanted color, telescope makers often use 2 or more objective lenses which are precisely matched together to bring the different wavelengths of light together at just the right spot on your eye, getting rid of that unwanted color around that beautiful star you're looking at. These color-corrected telescopes are called achromatic or apochromatic depending on the design. Precision glass is tough to build right because of the exact tolerances it takes to produce that exquisite image as opposed to a mediocre one. So if you want to get more size, you also increase design and manufacturing costs. This is why fine refractors are so hard to come by. They're really expensive to make. But I can tell you that my refractor, even though it's my smallest telescope, is my favorite by far. It's gorgeous to look at, but even more gorgeous to look through. If you're just starting out and want to look at our celestial neighbors like the Moon, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, a refractor of small size is really hard to beat, and it can be surprisingly affordable up to a modest size, say a 3-inch. But save a larger, more expensive refractor for a few years down the road when you're more advanced in the hobby, and you can afford one of higher quality. Next up is the reflecting telescope. Reflectors are definitely worthy of first telescope love. Because they're easy to build and use mirrors which are more forgiving in a lot of ways than the other 2 types of telescopes, they can often be found in great big sizes for not a lot of money. Reflectors use a mirror at the bottom of a long tube to reflect light back up to a smaller mirror at the top of the tube, then finally out the side to the eyepiece. Since it uses a mirror, it can be made much larger and at a cheaper cost than a refractor, and the mirror design is less prone to chromatic aberration, that annoying color fringing that can be found on lower-end refracting telescopes that we talked about in our first segment. John Dobson, an amateur astronomer like you and I, revolutionized the popularity of these reflectors in the mid-1960s when he invented a cheap and easy-to-use reflector mount, creatively called the Dobsonian mount. This mount design allowed anyone to point and use a relatively large telescope with no training and at a fraction of the cost of a traditional telescope mount. Since this type of mount is simple and manual in design, it brings the price down to a point where they become one of the least expensive ways to get into this hobby. Manual, you say, but I want that computer stuff and apps and things. Well, that's all good for down the road. But if you want to become a seasoned astronomer, manual is the way to go. It forces you to understand where things in the sky are and how to get there. Now, it's cool to be the guy that people go to when they want to know where the Andromeda Galaxy is, or Pollux and Castor, or even the humble North Star. Be that guy or gal. Manual forces you to really learn the map of the sky rather than just pushing a button. Now, buttons are cool too. Who doesn't like buttons? But they should be a convenience instead of a crutch to really knowing the heavens. Don't get your feathers in a ruffle, though. Reflectors can be purchased with go-to controlled mounts too, and they're usually called Newtonians, which are tripod mounted instead of using the Dobsonian arrangement. So don't be discouraged if that's what you have your heart set on. But if you're starting out on a budget and unsure whether or not this hobby is for you, the reflector, especially the Dobsonian reflector, is a solid favorite of amateurs around the globe. A reflecting telescope is sometimes called a light bucket because you can build them to really massive size. Like this one I recently drooled on at the Riverside Telescope Makers Conference in Big Bear, California. Remember, the more light you have, the better an image you get. Light bucket is an apt description of these star party favorites because their larger size allows them to pull in massive amounts of light. Their cost per inch savings can be unparalleled for any astronomer without a backing of a mid-sized space program. A reflector can be purchased from half a dozen reputable manufacturers for a fraction of the cost of a refractor or catadioptric of similar size. Celestron, Meade, Orion, and others have excellent Dobsonian or Newtonian telescopes that will bring you years of fun because they're inexpensive and really quite easy to maintain. You can get the most aperture or size for your money, which beats computer control hands down when you actually want to see something through that new telescope. For the beginner looking to see deep into the heavens, beyond our local moon and planets, the reflector is king. Catadioptric telescopes round out our segment on telescope designs for beginners. These always seem to be the rage with beginning amateurs because, well, they look pretty cool. Most of them have computer control and some can be run from your phone, so what's not to like about that? Catadioptric telescopes use what is called a compound or folded light path, and a design that uses both lenses and mirrors to get light from the front of the telescope back to the eyepiece. This design allows you to cram a whole lot of telescope into a really short tube. Why is that important, you ask? Well, first off, it makes it easier to take a high magnification telescope and put it on a really small mount. This is great for deep sky astronomers that don't want a telescope that's 9 feet long. We aren't really talking about telescope mounts today, but the type of mount that catadioptric telescopes use is that computerized go-to automatic mount that people really seem to get excited about. Even though refractors and reflectors have these options available on many models, the catadioptric is the one that most newbies think is the impressive one. Catadioptric telescopes have a type of lens at the front, which is called a corrector plate. Remember the chromatic aberration we talked about in our segment on refracting telescopes? Well, the corrector plate is ground and polished to a very precise shape to correct some of that chromatic aberration. As light passes through this corrector plate, it's reflected off of a mirror at the back, then back up to a second mirror mounted on the back of the corrector plate, and finally back down to the eyepiece. Sounds complicated, right? Well, it is. And they have to be made very precisely to work, but they're great telescopes for certain types of astrophotography, and definitely great when using eyeballs. And this is for everything from the planets to deep space objects. Size still plays a big part though, so like with the other two, the bigger the telescope, the more light it can gather. This type of telescope can be found in sizes ranging from 3 inches to 16 inches or more. Because of its design, they're the most compact telescopes for high magnification, and they're often found in university observatories, and are definitely a favorite with amateur astronomers. My first real telescope was the now ancient Meade ETX90, a schmidt-cassegrain design that was 3.5 inches of astronomy awesomeness. It was totally manual except for the crude clock gear that helped it to track the stars' movement through the night. It could see pretty bright stuff in the night sky like the Andromeda Galaxy, but it really struggled with dimmer objects because it just couldn't gather enough light. My 12-inch LX200 that was built 25 years ago has the chops to see some really dim stuff because of its huge size, but because it weighs about 200 pounds, it stays in the garage most days. Catadioptric telescopes have become really affordable in recent years because of advancements in technology, and you see a lot of them at amateur astronomy events. There's great Maksutov and Schmidt-cassegrain type telescopes that can be had from Celestron, Meade, Orion, and a few others. These can be great starter telescopes and loads of fun while camping in the mountains, since they're portable and light enough to fit in that small nook between your sleeping bags and your cooler. I have a Celestron Nexstar 6SE that makes it to most of my camping trips now because it gathers a reasonable amount of light while allowing me to get a decent view of deep sky objects, and it doesn't break my back when I'm setting it up. The computer control is nice when there's a lot of people around waiting to see multiple targets, since I don't have to manually hunt for the next object. But again, that's a convenience and shouldn't necessarily be the reason for having computer control. This can be a great choice for someone looking for a good all-around telescope, but be aware that the cost can be on the higher end of the scale for its size. These telescopes are perfect for anything from planetary viewing to deep space objects. I hope this series has helped you understand a little bit more about the different telescope designs, and you're now ready to work towards choosing your first telescope. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe to REDSHIFT Astronomy for more videos on getting started in astronomy, real-world gear reviews, and more. Until next time, good luck and clear skies.